Yeah.
Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. In their one-year stint in the ACC, Notre Dame went 10-2, undefeated in conference play, before losing to Alabama in the college football playoff. Now the Fighting Irish are back as an independent, but they're going through a lot of changes, meaning a playoff return is very unlikely. So welcome back to the Gridiron Expert again, everybody, here to break down, predict Notre Dame's schedule and record for this 2021 college football season. As always, make sure to continue to like, comment, subscribe, and share our videos. And also make sure to check out everything down in the description below, including our expert picks over on our website, thegridironexpert.com. Some of the best college football and now NFL spread picks in the entire country. Make sure to sign up today before the season starts. I promise you, you're not going to regret it. So let's take a look at Brian Kelly, guys, and the Fighting Irish. 10-2 last year. The lone losses were to Clemson in the ACC championship game, and then Alabama in the college football playoff, falling to the Crimson Tide 31-14. When you look at this team, guys, they lose so much from the one that made the playoff last year, and it starts on offense. That's where we'll start here. Only 2 starters back on offense for Notre Dame. They lose 9. And that starts with 4 offensive linemen and their star quarterback in Ian Book, who racked up 30 wins during his time in South Bend. 4 offensive linemen, Ian Book, their leading wide receiver in Javon McKinley. So many losses on offense, you know Notre Dame is going to take a step back, at least on that side of the ball. The good news for Notre Dame is that they're not necessarily breaking in a brand new quarterback. Yes, it's not Ian Book, but they're bringing in a guy named Jack Coan, who had playing experience, was a starter at Wisconsin, and has now transferred into South Bend. So that's huge. You're bringing in a guy who has legitimate, real playing experience, starting experience for a Power 5 program in the tough Big Ten. Not only is Coan in at quarterback, but Kyren Williams, who rushed for over 1,100 yards and 13 touchdowns last year, is back at running back. Pair him up with Chris Tyree, and Notre Dame could have one of the better running back duos in the country. The million-dollar question for Notre Dame offensively, guys, is the offensive line. Can they create lanes for these running backs to do work? Can they protect Jack Coan and give him time to throw and make good decisions? That is going to be the difference maker in Notre Dame's season, and the difference maker in a handful of games this season. Defensively, Notre Dame returns 6 starters. They do lose their defensive coordinator in Clark Lee, who left to go take the head coaching job at Vanderbilt. But they got a guy that is just as good, maybe even better, to be his replacement at defensive coordinator. And that is Marcus Freeman, coming in from Cincinnati. By far, one of, if not the best offseason hire from anybody this year. Landing Marcus Freeman was huge for Notre Dame. This was a defense that ranked in the top 25 in scoring last year, allowed just 19.7 points per game. Top 25 in rushing, allowed 113 rushing yards per game. And top 25 in total defense, allowing just 343.6 total yards per game. Yes, one of their leaders and biggest playmakers, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, is now gone, but Kyle Hamilton is back at safety, one of the best safeties in the nation. Leader of this defense, one of the leaders of the team, was also the leading tackler last year with 63. The defense will be the strength for Notre Dame. They're going to be just fine under Freeman's leadership. So we take a look at Notre Dame's schedule, guys. Again, we say a playoff berth isn't likely, not ruling anything out, isn't likely, but a New Year's 6 Bowl is not impossible. A New Year's 6 Bowl game is attainable in 2021, and you can expect maybe the Fighting Irish to get back into the playoff discussion in 2022. We take a look at their schedule. They open up at Florida State, so there's no cakewalk. Notre Dame does not get to ease into this season with a brand new quarterback and so many questions on offense. They have to bring their A game for a Sunday night matchup down in Tallahassee. And when you look at Florida State, Notre Dame beat them 42-26 last year. Notre Dame beat them 42-26 in South Bend last year. And that was kind of Jordan Travis's breakout game, kind of the first big game as starter for the Seminoles. And he very well could be the starter again this year if Mackenzie Milton does not take that job from him. Florida State returns 9 starters on offense. They landed a handful of key transfers on defense to pair up with the 5 returning starters they had. This Florida State team should improve. We have them as a borderline bowl team. But they're nowhere near elite, and they're nowhere near where Mike Norvell wants them to be. And despite so many losses on offense for Notre Dame, I believe the defense is the difference maker in this one. In Tallahassee, the defense is able to slow down Florida State. Notre Dame does just enough offensively. Kyren Williams does just enough, because I think they're going to try to ease Coan into the season a little bit as he continues to build chemistry with new receivers. And Notre Dame, in a major trap game, in a game that I think is much closer than it was last year, 16 points, beat Florida State on the road, but it is going to be close. We believe they do take care of Toledo out of the MAC, the first home game of the year for Notre Dame. Then they play Purdue out of the Big Ten. And look, we know that Purdue has George Karlaftis on the defensive line. And one of the best defensive linemen in the country. It's going to be interesting to see how he goes up against this Notre Dame offensive line, a depleted offensive line at that. I will say that I like that this game is in South Bend for Notre Dame. I wouldn't have wanted this one in West Lafayette. The Notre Dame secondary is going to be tested by Purdue with Jack Plummer or Aiden O'Connell as quarterback, and of course David Bell as their speedy wide receiver, the top wide receiver. But at the end of the day, it's Purdue's defense that's going to be their downfall. I think Kyren Williams has a big day. This is maybe the first game that we see Jack Coan really light up a team, really settle in. 3 games in, I think he has a solid game against the Boilermakers. He's feeling good, and Notre Dame is 3-0 with what I believe will be a double-digit win over the Boilermakers. So 3-0 going into what I think is the biggest stretch of Notre Dame's season. I mean, after the first 3 games, it gets absolutely brutal for the Fighting Irish. I mean, Wisconsin, Cincinnati, Virginia Tech, USC, North Carolina. Those 5 games are so huge for Notre Dame, and it really will make or break their season, whether or not it's going to be very special and whether they're in the hunt for the playoff going into November, or whether or not they take a step back and they're going to a New Year's Six or maybe a bowl game a little lesser than that. This 5 games will decide that. We start with Wisconsin in Chicago, rounding out September in Chicago. Now you look at Wisconsin. I'll go on record right now and say I don't think either team exceeds 28 points in this game, because that's how good both these defenses are. Notre Dame's defense is going to be elite. Wisconsin's defense, with 8 starters back, a defense that was a top 10 unit last year anyways, is going to be elite. So I would be shocked to see a lot of points scored in this game at Soldier Field. So a pure defensive battle here. But when you look at Wisconsin, first off, again, the Jack Coan reunion game. Let's not forget that. Coan used to play for Wisconsin, now playing against his former team. Would love nothing more than to get a victory over the Badgers. But when you look at the Badgers, guys, I believe they own the quarterback edge with Graham Mertz, now in his 2nd year as starter with Paul Chryst in Wisconsin. I believe Wisconsin owns the edge up front at the line of scrimmage. They absolutely own that offensive line edge, and that's crucial. Crucial for a team that wants to run the ball. Crucial for a team that's going to be protecting their quarterback. Wisconsin's going to have a very stingy defensive line as well. Doesn't bode well for Notre Dame, considering how depleted their offensive line is. And I'm not saying, when I say that, I'm not saying that I think Notre Dame's offensive line is going to be non-existent. But when you lose 4 starters, and you're only 4 games into the year, it takes some time to build that up. It takes some time to build chemistry and figure things out. And it's not good when you face a dominant Wisconsin team that wants to own the time of possession and bully you up front. And I think that's exactly what the Badgers do here. I think that this game is very close. I don't think Wisconsin blows out Notre Dame. But I do believe that the Badgers defeat Notre Dame in Chicago behind the strength of their defense and behind a little bit better offensive consistency and line of scrimmage domination. Notre Dame then comes back home to South Bend to take on Cincinnati, the Marcus Freeman reunion. So Jack Coan gets to face off against his former team. The very next week, Marcus Freeman gets to face off against his former team. The Bearcats, it's no secret, guys. They are the best group of 5 team in the country. Some have them pegged as a playoff dark horse because they have a road game at Indiana and they have a road game at Notre Dame. They win both of those and then run the table in their conference. They could be a Final Four team by season's end. The Bearcats get the benefit of coming off a bye coming into this game. They'll play Indiana. They'll get a bye week. They'll then come to South Bend. When you look at the Bearcats, too, I also, again, believe they own the quarterback edge. Desmond Ridder, back at quarterback for the Bearcats, 1 more year. They have a very dominant defensive line. They have a very dominant secondary. 6 starters back on that side of the ball. A defense that allowed 16.8 points per game, 111.1 rushing yards per game, 213.5 passing yards per game. The Cincinnati defense is absolutely elite, and they're not afraid of anybody. Luke Fickell is not afraid of anybody. This is a trendy upset pick for many. And I'm going to go with the trend. I'm going to pick Cincinnati to upset Notre Dame in South Bend. I believe their defense is just that good. And again, I look at Notre Dame's offense and I think, can they get anything going against this elite Cincinnati defense? That's question number one. Can they get anything going against Cincinnati's defense? And if it becomes a back and forth shootout, do I trust Jack Coan to get the job done? Because I don't think Notre Dame has much success running the ball against Cincinnati, which means Coan's going to have to do the majority of the work and the heavy lifting on October 2nd. And I don't think he can do that. Cincinnati wins this game. Cincinnati will beat one of Indiana and Notre Dame. If not both, they'll defeat at least one. And I like their odds coming off a week of rest at Notre Dame more than I like them at Indiana. Notre Dame drops their second straight. They then go to Virginia Tech. And I hate this for Notre Dame. After back-to-back physical games, both games we predict will be losses, they then travel out to Lane Stadium in Blacksburg for a potential night game against the Hokies. And we know how difficult it is to play in Blacksburg at night. On top of that, Virginia Tech, like Cincinnati, is coming off a week of rest. So with Notre Dame has played Wisconsin and Cincinnati, no break. Tack on Florida State and Purdue, Power 5 opponents, no rest. They're getting Cincinnati. They got a week of rest. Virginia Tech gets a week of rest. Notre Dame's beat up. And this almost feels like a must-win for both teams. Feels like a must-win for Virginia Tech, who could struggle early on. Feels like a must-win for Notre Dame, coming off back-to-back losses. But I don't think that the Fighting Irish get the job done against the Hokies. 4 returning starters on offensive line for Virginia Tech. 8 returning starters on defense. By this point in the year, October 9th, I believe Braxton Burmeister starts to find his groove. Neither quarterbacks are anything special. Not going to be a very electric quarterback battle between Jack Coan and Braxton Burmeister, but I believe that Virginia Tech across the board has more advantages in this game. Home field advantage, maybe a slight offensive advantage. Defense still goes to Notre Dame, but so slightly, but they get the job done at home, and the Fighting Irish have 3 straight losses. They're 3-3 going into their bye week, and then the USC game. And I know that's not ideal for anybody. No one wants to hear that. No, and everybody will disagree with that. Maybe they do beat Cincinnati. Maybe they do beat Virginia Tech. But I think those 3 games are so brutal, and it's going to start to take a toll on Notre Dame, which is why this bye week comes at such a perfect time, because Brian Kelly's going to turn things around. 3 straight losses is unacceptable. Granted, they are good teams, but it's unacceptable. They're rested. They're going to get healthy, and they're going to take on their final 2 toughest games of the year when they take on USC and North Carolina. So let's take a look at USC. Notre Dame's coming off a bye. USC's coming off a bye. You hate it for the Fighting Irish to face so many teams that are coming off their week of rest too. You always hate that. But you look at USC. They don't play very well against Notre Dame. At least haven't lately in South Bend. They have not done it very lately in South Bend. Now look at Notre Dame's secondary, guys. We mentioned that's going to be a key strength for them, led by Kyle Hamilton. Well, you want to have a good secondary when you're facing a team like USC that runs an air raid offense. Graham Harrell's air raid offense out in L.A., led by Keaton Slovis, one of the best quarterbacks in the country. But he does lose Amon-Ra St. Brown. He does lose Tyler Vaughns. And the defense for Todd Orlando should improve, but it's not quite there yet. I believe Notre Dame wins this game off their week of rest. Big-time rivalry game. They know this is absolutely a must-win. The defense for Marcus Freeman steps up big in this one. And Notre Dame beats USC. It might be close, but they will beat USC. They then play North Carolina the very week after in South Bend. They beat North Carolina 31-17 in Chapel Hill last year. Now, obviously, different Notre Dame team, different North Carolina team. But there's something to be said for facing a team in North Carolina that's very similar to that of USC. In back-to-back weeks, Notre Dame will play 2 pass-happy teams. 2 great quarterbacks in Keaton Slovis and Sam Howell. 2 teams that can run the ball, but that's not going to be their main strength, especially not for North Carolina anymore with the loss of Michael Carter and Javonte Williams. And I look at Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman, they're saying, yes, North Carolina is a little bit different than USC, but the main goal is still there, and that's stop the pass. Notre Dame is not going to get exploited 2 weeks in a row. And when they're facing an offense that similar, I think playing USC the week prior actually helps. And I think Notre Dame beats North Carolina in South Bend. A lot of people think that's a hot take. A lot of people might disagree with that too. But the defense rises to the occasion. And while, yes, I do think North Carolina owns the offensive edge over Notre Dame, I believe that Notre Dame can have that defensive edge. And at the end of the day, that plus home field advantage, high off a win over USC, I think does just enough to get a narrow victory over the Tar Heels. We then believe they beat Navy at home. Navy went 3-7. Notre Dame has won 8 of the last 9 against the midshipmen. They don't really struggle against the triple option. They really never have. 8 of the last 9 against the midshipmen. Marcus Freeman will have a plan drawn up to stop Navy in this game. They've now won 3 straight. They then travel to Virginia. Notre Dame needs to find a way to stop the pass again. Brennan Armstrong and Billy Kemp IV, that's going to be a dynamic duo in the ACC. Dynamic duo for the Cavaliers. And when you look at this is Notre Dame's first road game in a little over a month. They'll play at Virginia Tech. They don't go on the road again until they play at Virginia. So they've gotten a little used to home field advantage. They're going to have to. It's going to be a bit of a culture shock. But Virginia had the worst passing defense in the ACC last year. I think this is a game where you could see Jack Coan finally put up some solid numbers. Not to say that he won't in these other games, but he might have a big day against the Cavaliers. At Virginia, I'm still a little scared about their defense, and I think Marcus Freeman's defense, again, is able to shut down Brennan Armstrong. They do that, Virginia's not going to beat you on the ground. Notre Dame goes on the road, beats the Cavaliers. They have 2 games left, Georgia Tech and Stanford, neither of which scare me too much. Georgia Tech, Notre Dame defeated 31-13 last year, beat them by 18. And yes, the Yellow Jackets should improve a little bit under Jeff Collins, might even make a bowl game this year. Coming into South Bend with as bad as their defense was, as inconsistent as Jeff Sims was as a true freshman quarterback, doesn't give me a warm fuzzy feeling for Georgia Tech to pull off this upset. Notre Dame wins that one. They then travel out west for their season finale to take on Stanford. Stanford's defense, their back 7, the linebacking core and the secondary, perfect. They're going to be fantastic for David Shaw. But it's their offense that worries me. Davis Mills is gone now. Jack West is the brand new quarterback. 6 starters back on offense, but I don't know if that offense is going to be any good. Stanford's going to win their games, very similar to Notre Dame, behind the strength of their defense. But out west, I might venture to say that Notre Dame owns the offensive edge, and I like Marcus Freeman to get the job done against an offense for Stanford that I just don't have any high expectations for. Stanford's not the team that we used to see back in the early 2010, 2012, somewhere around there. They're far from that. Notre Dame beats Stanford in the season finale out west and finishes 9-3. Now, that might be a shock to some. You might say, how do they lose to Virginia Tech or Cincinnati and beat USC and North Carolina? Again, it's college football, first off. Second off, I think Notre Dame gets beat down after that Wisconsin game. I think they struggle against a very solid Cincinnati team. And then the Virginia Tech game, just tack it on there because they're beat up after 2 games, and it's Lane Stadium, among other things. Brian Kelly turns things around. Getting a bye week, literally right at the halfway point of the season. 6 games in. 6 games in, you got 6 games left. Right there, that's where Brian Kelly turns things around. And the Fighting Irish will turn it around. I think 10-2 is best case scenario, but we've got them going 9-3. Notre Dame will be in the hunt for a New Year's 6 bowl game once again, and I'd expect them to be back in the playoff hunt for 2022. So guys, as always, thank you so much for watching us here at The Gridiron Expert on YouTube. Make sure to continue to like, comment, subscribe, and share our videos. Also, make sure to check out everything down in the description below, including those brand new expert picks over on our website, thegridironexpert.com. And once again, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time right here on The Gridiron Expert.